Hey everybody, welcome to our first edition of the Facebook Live segment with Ken Corbitt, our K-State beat writer, Matt Galloway, our KU beat writer. I'm Kevin Haskin, the columnist for the Topeka Capital Journal and CJ Online. This is a little deal we're going to do just to throw out some different ideas about KU and K-State and where these two are headed. Right now, obviously, it's the end of the non-conference schedule in football. And Kenny, big trip this week, maybe, sort of, to Vanderbilt, although it might be kind of like a home game for the Cats.
Yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt doesn't have a huge stadium. I think they had 25,000 last week, their home game, so it could be 10 to 15,000 K-State fans there. So kind of treating it like an early bowl game. You know, it's a good destination. Nashville is a nice tourist city, place to go. So Bill Snyder said he's not going to have time to go to the Grand Ole Opry, but he hopes the fans will and get to do a few things. So yeah, they're kind of treating it like an early bowl game. So and hopefully they'll have the results they did at last year's bowl game.
A Bill Snyder tour of Music City would be quite entertaining. Well, yeah. Maybe, I don't know.
I was surprised to read in your column that Vanderbilt had such a small capacity, especially considering KU's playing at Ohio, which has, I think, a greater capacity, 28,000.
24, I think I read, but really tiny, both stadiums.
One of the smallest I can ever remember KU playing at.
Yeah, because I was trying to remember the last time they would have played at a stadium that small, and I almost thought of the old Memorial Stadium at K-State, but they probably played at a place maybe smaller than Ohio Stadium. But that trip for the Jayhawks now looms real large. I thought going into last week that would be a turning point game at Ohio. And now after we lost to Central Michigan, who knows what KU's got.
Well, I think if you're a KU fan and if KU were to have defeated Central Michigan, you look at the Ohio game as kind of you're playing with house money. Mm-hmm. Because I think the goal all along was to go 2-1 in non-conference play because, you know, we've seen KU struggle on the road. We've seen KU struggle in Big 12 play. So, I mean, if you could have picked up two of those wins at home, which you were both favored in if you're KU, then that kind of allows you to have a little bit more of a free mind, as Bill Self likes to say, when you're going on the road at Ohio. Now the pressure's really on, and you know, every year before their first road game, KU players, and I'm sure their fathers and grandfathers at this point have heard about their road losing streak, and so I think it's at 41 games now and true road games and 44 at neutral sites. So it's just another thing that has to become a distraction at this point. So I think the pressure's really on. I really thought last Saturday was KU's most important game of the year in terms of setting the tone and winning a game that they're favored in, and that doesn't happen very often in Lawrence. And they came up short, well short, a few touchdowns, I think 18 points, and I think the pressure's on this Saturday.
Are the minds of any of these KU players altogether that free based on, one, the way they played last week, but two, yesterday, I mean, when David Beatty is asked about the road losing streak, he says something to the fact that it's the first time I've thought about it. No, dude. I mean, you thought about it when you were hired.
Yeah.
And that's been on your mind ever since. It has to be, and the way the thing has grown now under his watch.
Yeah, and it's funny. I went back and read a story that Jesse Newell wrote before David Beatty's first road game, and it is something that David Beatty inherited, and he's not really responsible for, and none of the players are responsible for that. It's something that started in 2009, but it's something that he addressed in his first news conference ahead of his first road game, and he talked about how big it looms, and he's basically said the same thing before every first road game of the season, which is, boy, somebody's got to break it. Why not us? And I mean, eventually you run out of time to be able to be the team that stakes the claim to do that.
Yeah, UTEP, right?
Yeah, UTEP in 2009, very, very early on in the Barack Obama administration. So.
Yes. Ken, it seemed to me after the K-State game last Saturday that these players were genuinely excited about a matchup against an SEC rival, the chance to go on the road and play an opponent that's in the Power Five, as opposed to what they've begun the season with a couple of mismatches and games we figured would be mismatches.
Yeah, I think they are excited. I mean, last year they opened the year at Stanford, which is not the opener you want. I mean, with the Big 12 edict now to play a Power 5 opponent, you're going to do that. And to do that, you're going to have to play home and home. So, this is the situation it is. But, they got the games against Central Arkansas and Charlotte to ease into things. And now this is going to be a good test with Vanderbilt. I mean, Vanderbilt is not, Alabama or the powers of the SEC, but it's a name program. It's a good team. They were 6-6 last year before losing a bowl game, but a lot like K-State in a balanced offense and a good defense. So I think both teams are going to find out a lot about themselves. Vanderbilt's had the same type of schedule as K-State. They actually have been on the road, went to Middle Tennessee and won. They beat Alabama A&M at home last week. So, they're looking to find out about themselves too. So, I think it's going to be a good test for both teams. And K-State's excited to play an SEC team. They played SEC teams the last 2 years in bowl games. Beat A&M last year, lost Arkansas the year before. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they haven't done it, but first time a regular season road game at an SEC team since 2007 at Auburn.
Mm. A coach, too, that is not a household name yet. You're probably not going to become one coaching at Vanderbilt, but, if you do, you're going to move on somewhere else. But one who's quite creative, I think.
He is. Bill Snyder has raved about their defense, just how physical they are, but also how sound fundamentally they are. And, that's something that gets Bill's attention when teams are sound. They do a lot of different things and can cause you some problems. So, again, like I say, I think there are some similarities between these two teams, so it's going to be interesting to see, how they counteract each other.
Matt, last week at KU, you did a story and led with a fan and a sign and trust the process and that sort of thing. How much can we trust the process? How much has that trust kind of been, really dissolved, seen it dissolve here with that loss last week? Arguably the worst loss in Beatty's 2+ years at KU.
Well, the two of you were at Big 12 Media Day with me over the summer, and I felt just a tangible buzz around KU football for a team that only had, what is it, 2 wins in David Beatty's first 2 seasons. He was the last coach there. He talked for, 95 minutes. He looked around, and Bob Bowlesby was there, and he was like, do you want to switch places with me? Everybody wanted to talk to David Beatty because they felt like the program was on an uptick. I feel like losing at home to Central Michigan in a game that you're favored to win, that evaporated all of that. We saw a couple of JUCO recruits decommit this week. I'm not sure if that's related. It's just, you got to wonder if the season continues down that path of losing games that, you finish with 1 or 2 wins. Is that a situation where some of these top tier recruits that really created a lot of this buzz, particularly from the New Orleans area, if they decommit because those were just oral commitments, is that going to be a situation that just makes the situation kind of snowball a little bit? We have to give a shout out to Chris Neal, our staff photographer, who got that shot of the fan with the sign. I think it perfectly embodied what I was trying to write with that story, which is I think KU is always going to have those hardcore fans. It's just, I think they had an opportunity this year to get a lot of casual fans on board. And I think just given how, even in the second quarter of that game, things completely unraveled, I think that might have been the point when they lost a lot of them.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny anecdote to that. I ran into a guy who I see at a tailgate, a couple of different tailgates that have been going on for years upon years, of KU fans who are really hardcore football fans, want to see this program, raise and elevate itself again to after going to that Orange Bowl and then watching everything just crumble more or less after that. And as we spoke earlier this week, he said he wasn't altogether that down, but others that are in that group definitely were after that game, just entirely deflated, and it was a deflating loss. It was tough, and not one you expect. You didn't expect. You thought maybe, okay, this game goes in the fourth quarter, because for Kansas to beat a team in the bowl subdivision, even if it's a group of 5 team, and that's going to happen. But really, a game we thought the Jayhawks would win.
And I do think KU was only a 3 or 4 point favorite anyway. So, but the way that they lost by 18 points, that's what I would use. Why I would use the word alarming.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is after they started the second half strong, got right back into the game.
Yeah.
They were there and had their chance, and then the defense gives up the big plays. So, that's what's kind of alarming when you fight back to get in position and then can't finish it off.
Yeah.
It could have been a very stirring victory for them if they would have rallied the second half and pulled it out.
Yeah. That would have been definitely something to build on going into this week against an Ohio team that really dominated KU from the outset last year and got up big on them in Lawrence.
There were a couple opportunities last year. I remember Montel Kozart got injured in the key drive. But again, the final score, double digits, I believe. It was just, it wasn't really as competitive. But at that point, again, that was still year 2. It was still early on. You were still thinking, David Beatty needs time. I still think he needs time. But I think that the buzz, the goodwill that he built up in the offseason, I don't sense it anymore around the program.
Yeah. What went through your mind when you saw Montel Kozart's name out there?
I was happy for him. Montel Kozart is truthfully one of the nicest players that I've ever interviewed. He's a good guy. Had some bad performances and always made a point to come in, be the first one in the availability room, the last one out. After his time with the football team was done, he did some internship with the media wing of KU, and he was always very helpful. So I'm rooting for Montel Kozart. He's a great kid.
Yeah, I am too. I feel the same way. And when his red shirt was shredded there midway through that freshman year, I thought the timing was poor by Charlie Weiss, but I thought at the time, okay, here's Charlie Weiss, this quarterback guru maybe, who has got his own guy in there, his own recruit, as opposed to a transfer from, another FBS program. And I thought, okay, maybe Weiss could massage this kid into something pretty good. Well, we never really saw that materialize, or saw much of anything materialize with Charlie. But I'm with you. I really like Montel Kozart and hope he does well. Kenny, what's the biggest thing you're kind of looking for to me with K-State right now? It's the front seven on defense, and particularly the linebackers, to see how they maybe respond against an opponent with better speed and a little better players, obviously, too. That to me is what makes me curious going into this game Saturday.
It is. I think, I didn't think there were many questions on the defensive line with 3 starters back, but they haven't performed great. I mean, they've been solid, but the question was the linebackers, and Trent Tanking and Jade Kirby have been solid, but again, they're veteran guys who are going to be in position, but they're not the greatest athletes in the world. And the thing is, behind them, you have a couple of young sophomores. I mean, some guys like Elijah Sullivan, who is showing a lot of promise. Justin Hughes, a little bit too. I mean, they were high school teammates, both from Tucker, Georgia, sophomores. Justin is a little bit further behind, Bill Snyder said yesterday, but they like what Sullivan's doing. So, you got that mix between the veterans that come in, very solid guys, and some young, very athletic guys with speed. And I think as you get more into the Big 12 season, those young guys, if they get the experience and learn the system and don't make mistakes, you're going to see more of them, just because K-State's going to need that speed against the Big 12. But right now, Tanking and Jade Kirby are very solid and doing what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. We actually got a question from Alan Cunningham on Facebook Live for you, Kenny. He wants to know if you have any idea of the status of Byron Pringle and what he's up to.
Yeah, I think he's going to be. I think he was just a little nicked up last week. Both him and Duke Shelley, minor injuries. I mean, if it was a Big 12 game, he probably could have gone. But why take a chance, especially when you're that deep at receiver? But I expect Pringle to play this week. So they're so deep at receiver, and he gives them that size, big play threat, and also in the return game. So they miss him and DJ Reed back on the return game together too. So, but I think Byron should be ready to go this week.
Yeah, wide receiver was a unit that both KU and K-State were thought to be deep at, and KU still is. But you look at kind of the losses they've had. Laquivionte Gonzalez leaving the program, Steven Sims injured last week, although David Beatty expects him to come back this week, and Dalen Charlotte, the transfer from Alabama, who's completely fallen off the face of the earth. He comes in kind of in garbage time. So still a pretty deep unit. A lot of other guys like Chase Harrell stepping up and Quan Hampton in lieu of those other guys. But just something that is interesting to keep an eye on between the two programs.
Impressed the way you fielded that Facebook Live question.
Yeah. Natural, yeah.
Ed McMahon never had to do that. So that was quite impressive.
Yeah.
If anybody else wants to weigh in with a question, by all means, throw them at us.
Absolutely.
Looking at KU with the Alabama transfers, how big a deal is it that they're not playing? How big a deal is it that they brought them in and now they're not performing right away once eligible? What are we to make of that?
Well, I mean, I think KU's, and I really think a lot of schools have a bad track record of guys that come in as strict transfers. We saw Shane Morris of Central Michigan, a grad transfer, really do well for Central Michigan last week against KU. I think the third most passing yards ever allowed by a KU defense. Mm-hmm. I think grad transfers are a little bit different. I think it's a big deal that the Alabama, I mean, because that was part of the buzz. Again, we're talking about dissecting why KU had so much buzz going into the season. Well, we already talked about Dalen Charlotte. Charles Baldwin, as you mentioned, a guy who was listed as a five-star prospect, transferred from Alabama, a guy who had some issues, Nick Saban, some conflicts, had a year to sit out, learn the system, get his mind right, kind of a reality check, realize, I need to get my head on straight if I want to, earn it, as David Beatty says, and get that position. The first depth chart they released, he's second string on right tackle, and then the one that they just released this week, he's not even listed. Mm-hmm. I thought the most interesting thing that David Beatty said at the news conference yesterday, I don't know if you agree with this, is at someday I'm paraphrasing, someday we'll get over the fact that Charles Baldwin came from Alabama. Mm-hmm. That should have been interesting for about 2 minutes. So definitely, I would use the word doghouse to say where Charles Baldwin is probably residing right now for KU. He did say that it's not necessarily an injury situation or a disciplinary reason. He just said that he isn't good enough to beat out the other guys for the job.
Well, it takes time for transfers. I mean, you look at K-State, you have Carlos Strickland, a wide receiver transferred from Cal last year, redshirted. I mean, he's having trouble getting on the field. And then you look at a Dalton Schoen, a walk-on, who's been in the program 3 years now, making big strides, really helping this team. So, it takes a while in systems to learn the offense and gain the trust of other players too.
Yeah. I'm sure you were real surprised to see a walk-on perform like that in the
at
opener.
K-State, it's hard to believe. So
yeah,
I mean, Dalton Schoen, I mean, he's one of those guys. I mean, he's deceptively fast. I mean, he's not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but he gets open and. Had a 70-yard touchdown that first game, but, he was wide open, broke the coverage, as Bill Snyder said. If he hadn't caught the ball, he'd been over on the sideline with me. He was that wide open. But, again, it just goes to show the jewels that they can find and develop them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to the transfer thing, one reason I had reservations about Bender dates back to Heaps and Chris, two quarterbacks that Weiss brought in, and they couldn't perform at a winning level at KU. Not entirely their fault. They weren't behind winning linemen either, but that's why I sort of wanted to reserve judgment on Bender. And to this point, I think Peyton Bender is somebody who could be certainly a productive quarterback for him. He's getting enough opportunities to throw. What's your take on him early on?
A program record 62 pass attempts, and David Beatty was asked about the offensive line yesterday, and he said, well, 62 pass attempts and only 2 sacks. I'm happy with that. So he said, I think if you told me going in that would have been the case, I would have taken that. I think that's a little deceptive. I think the offensive line had a much worse afternoon than the 2 sacks show on the stat line. I think Peyton Bender, I mean, look, he had a game, granted it was against an FCS opponent in SEMO that was just not at the level of KU. We saw it last year with Rhode Island, but none of those other transfers that you mentioned had games like that. I think that was the most passing yards that KU's had since Reesing, the most passing touchdowns KU's had since 2009 with Reesing. So I think we saw signs that Peyton Bender, and even though he had no touchdowns, 2 interceptions on Saturday, I thought he still moved the ball well at times, like Kenny mentioned at the start of the third quarter. Those are things that we just never saw from those other guys. So I think the talent is there with Peyton Bender. I think given the struggles that the right side of the offensive line has had in particular, I think David Beatty wants to see him run the ball more, which is just not his game. One of the first conversations I ever had with Peyton Bender was him basically talking about how he's a traditional pocket passer. He can scramble, but he prefers to stay in there, and that was a big point of emphasis for David Beatty on Saturday after the loss was, you got to know whenever to not tuck it and run, as he told me after I asked that question, but recognize the defense and what they're doing and that you're uncovered, and just pick up your 5 or 6 yards and move on to the next play. I think that's more than anything what David Beatty wants to see out of Peyton Bender moving forward.
First conversation I had with Bender, he spoke of the quirky nature of one Mike Leach, who he played for at Washington State, so that's always fun. Kenny, at quarterback, we're seeing a bit of a different guy, too, at K-State this year. He now has an arm again. Jesse Ertz, how's he performed?
I think very solid. He's played 3 quarters both games. So the big thing they wanted to see from Jesse this year was better accuracy passing. Last year, he was just under 60%, and so far through 2 games, not a big test so far, but he's over 70%. So, he's been efficient, and he showed the arm strength. That first game, the long touchdown passes showed what he can do with getting the ball downfield, and with the depth they have a running back, he's not going to have to run as much. He ran a little bit last week because he got chased out of the pocket some, which was a little concerning. But I don't think he's going to take the punishment he did last year with all the running backs they have. But running is still a big part of the K-State's offense. The quarterback run game, he will do that. But so far, he's been very efficient and very accurate with his passing.
Passed a note along to Tim Beisel, our sports editor, earlier today. Jesse ranks 8th in the nation among quarterbacks in attempts without an interception. I think he was at 106 maybe, and Mason Rudolph leads that with 185, and Baker Mayfield ranks 10th in the country. So you've got some accurate arms in this league that pose a lot of threats as we move into conference play. I'm ready to see conference play myself right now. I'm looking forward to it. The Wildcats will have a week off before they get into it. Is this a schedule that Snyder really endorses? It seems like to me he's always talked about stair-stepping in terms of non-conference games and how good an opponent is, what level they are. And then he gets a week off prior to the start of Big 12 play. It almost seems like an ideal setup for him.
Well, exactly, because they were able to adjust the schedule, because originally they had week 2 off and then go to Vanderbilt this week and then play Charlotte next week. But they were able to move that Charlotte game up a week, and now they have the week off before opening conference against Baylor. So, yeah, this non-conference couldn't have set up any better for them as far as the level of competition and the way it was set up. And even though he has to go on the road for one, which he doesn't like, I think that's going to be good for them ultimately. So it was a good step ladder for them.
Yeah. In terms of the KU schedule, I mean, are we looking at, again, a year where maybe KU can ambush an opponent at home because nobody comes into Lawrence expecting too much? We've seen that over the years, and then KU couldn't pull out those kind of victories. Last year did, again, in overtime against Texas.
But there was also the Iowa State game that a lot of people thought was a golden opportunity for KU. Sure. I think when they lost that Iowa State game, a lot of people thought, oh man, we're going to have another winless conference season. The interesting thing about the KU schedule, 4 home games in their first 5 contests. They open up against West Virginia and then Texas Tech back-to-back at home. I think a lot of people before last week would have looked at Texas Tech as kind of a winnable game, but anytime you play Texas Tech and you have a secondary that's struggling, I mean, I don't care who's the coach or the quarterback, that's going to be a tough matchup for the defense. And I think the one that everybody's circling right now is the Baylor contest. That's something that, I mean, Baylor lost again this week. They're 0-2. They lost to Turner Gill and Liberty in week 1. I know that's something that a lot of KU fans either got a kick out of or kind of drove them mad just a little bit, that Turner Gill was able to get more Big 12 road wins at Liberty than he was at KU. But I think that's the one that everybody's circling right now. But then again, last year, not a lot of people were circling the Texas game. So maybe KU will surprise somebody, be it West Virginia, Texas Tech, maybe even, dare I say, K-State. So we'll see at some point this year.
You know, I've gardened a little bit in my life, and I hate pulling weeds, so I don't garden too much anymore. But I'm not sure I'd ever plant a flag into artificial turf. How about you guys?
I love that. I don't think he should have apologized for that at all. No. I think that was, I mean, a guy that had to walk into a stadium and see 100,000 people with posters of him from his DUI mugshot and just rubbing it in his face. I had no issues with that at all. I love that, actually.
Well, and their home game last year when they lost to Ohio State, they listened to Ohio State sing their fight song on their field. So, yeah, I mean, that's what college sports is about. It's about some of that stuff. So, I mean, you know, who knows when they're going to ever play Ohio State again. You know, if they do, it'll be in the playoffs. So it can make a little more. But, yeah, you got to have a little edge to things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
College sports needs villains just as much as pro sports needs villains. And I wouldn't even say that was a villainous move. I think that was just something that maybe some more traditional folks might have had an issue with, but I didn't at all.
I didn't either, except for the fact he just didn't have a sharp enough point on the flag stick to get it into the ground. But probably a little lucky it didn't jab him back a little bit. But, yeah, it was certainly a really good win for the Big 12.
And not to interrupt you, sorry, along that same line, Jason Groth on Facebook wants to know, Earl, what do you think the overall outlook is for Oklahoma kind of leading the charge for the Big 12 now.
Well, I think it's good. I really do. I still question this Big 12 championship game and what it could possibly do to the league champion in regular season play. I just think it's an unfair setup. If you were to put the game, if you were to award the regular season champion with a home field site with that game, I'd like it better. But as it is at a neutral site, and I know it's about money, even as much as Bob Bowlesby didn't want to make it about money. Every school in the conference stands to make $3 million for it. So from it, but I just don't like that concept. I've seen it happen too many times, including Kansas State in 1998 when that particular game took them out of a potential. Well, in that game they were going for the national championship game and then got beaten double overtime by Texas A&M. So I don't know that the conference really needed this 13th data point. That would be my concern. My other concern would be the health of Baker Mayfield and if they can keep him healthy, because he was struggling a little bit, it seemed like, with cramping at Ohio State the other night. And man, I've seen a lot of cramping early on in these games, and the weather at some places hasn't been overly conducive to that. But seen a lot of it. What do you guys just think of Oklahoma and their performance and how that hoists them into an obvious favorite role in this league, despite the fact Oklahoma State's mighty good too?
Yeah, I mean, beginning of the year, I thought Oklahoma State was the team, mainly because of the talent offensively, but also they have K-State and Oklahoma at home. I questioned Oklahoma. Yeah, you got Baker Mayfield back, but you lost Dede Westbrook, you lost Samaje Perine, you lost Joe Mixon. Those are some awfully good offensive guys. So, and I know Oklahoma has talent coming up behind it, but it's not proven talent. But they've showed that game at Ohio State they still have some playmakers on offense, especially the receiver that came in from Kentucky made some big plays for them. So I think, again, it'll come down to their defense. Can they get some stops? While Ohio State doesn't have the most dynamic offense, so, they were able to stop them. But, yeah, I think the Big 12 at the top is going to be very strong with Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, K-State. TCU looks on the rebound, too, and who knows how good West Virginia is, too. So I think it's going to be very good at the top.
It was definitely a signature win for Oklahoma. I think it was the kind of win that would, at the end of the year, make people think, okay, well, you don't need to play in a championship game. You beat Ohio State at Ohio State. So that kind of goes to your point. I just have to be a little bit leery of these early season matchups. We saw last year with Notre Dame and Texas. The outcome of that game, everybody, boosted both of those teams up in the ratings and rankings after that, and they both ended up being bad teams. I think Ohio State might be a little bit overrated. I think they struggled mightily in Week 1 against Indiana, if I remember correctly.
Quite a while, and then one going away.
So we might need to. The jury might still be out on Ohio State, but if I had to put money down on who I think is favorite in the Big 12, I'd probably go with Oklahoma State still. I think they just have too much depth and too much talent, and I just like what Mike Gundy's put together there.
Yeah, I like him a lot too. The thing about Oklahoma, the biggest loss I thought was going to be Bob Stoops.
Exactly.
And now I'm not even sure they lost him as much camera time as he got the other night. So, he was obviously still around and rooting on his boys.
Yeah, I mean, who knew how Lincoln Riley's going to react when the pressure's on? Calling the game, he's still calling plays, and you got to make all the other decisions too. So, but he seemed to have a pretty calm demeanor on the sideline. So, but I mean, there's still. It'll be interesting to see how he handles everything, especially with all the added pressures of outside influences on a head coach.
Well, I thought he made a great hire too in Ruffin McNeil as defensive coordinator, bringing him in, somebody a little bit different yet has experience in the Big 12, and I thought that was a good hire. But we'll see how it all plays out. I think that's good for this week. My Fitbit's going on, and I got it, and it's just. To make it look good on my wrist, that's about all I use it for. But anyways,
I thought that was the new Apple Watch 10 or X or whatever it is.
We can pretend it is. I'd use that about as much as I use this. So.
Just don't use it to steal signs from the opponents. So.
That's right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week with another Facebook Live on Wednesday. Take care.